Hello, hello year 12. I hope this thing is recording, turned on. The audio's okay, I don't know. I've decided to do this not with Red Dead Redemption but No Man's Sky. I know you might get some groans for that because people don't tend to rate this game, but it's probably one of my favorites. It's very low key, so I can talk about politics and the English language while I play. I'm also going to play on permadeath mode, so it's very hard, and if the character dies, the save game gets deleted. So it's high stakes still, but it's pretty cruisy, and it's a beautiful game, and it lets me read this while I go. So I've been talking to a few of you about craft of writing, your ideas. So I figured I'd just read through the Orwell text, and I've highlighted a bunch of stuff in a few different colors, and when I get to that stuff, I'll comment on it if I've got any ideas. Alright, so let's get started. Most people who bother with the matter at all would admit that the English language is in a bad way, but it is generally assumed that we cannot, by conscious action, do anything about it. Our civilization is decadent, and our language, so the argument runs, must inevitably share in the general collapse. It follows that any struggle against the abuse of language is a sentimental archaism, like preferring candles to electric light or handsome cabs to aeroplanes. Alright, that last bit I highlighted, and I've got to start the game now. So, yeah, what does that mean? He's kind of almost from the start saying that his own argument is a flawed one, because language does evolve, and, you know, there isn't really any point in struggling against the change of language. You know, and a lot of you guys have thought about writing about things like emojis or modern language and how we communicate in the 21st century. And he's doing that as well, but he's thoughtful in that he prefaces the argument or starts the argument with the idea that, you know, it's almost a folly in itself. He has to acknowledge that language does change. What I like about this, and what I'll pick up on a few times, is he forces himself to use a simile. When he says, like preferring candles to electric light or handsome cabs to aeroplanes. He doesn't need to do that, and I think he probably has gone back and done it in editing. But as you'll see as you read through this document, he jams these similes in to take his own advice, because otherwise it would be highly... I think I'm going to die until I get this stuff.
Extreme heat damage detected.
Sodium. Where's sodium? Sodium. Why has this changed? Okay, my character, looks like my character's gonna die unless I can find a cave here. Oh, that's a cave. By the looks of it. There we go. This is nice. Fine. So he'll force himself to use a simile, like a dying man on a foreign planet, nowhere to go. His essay will die unless he follows his own advice, and that advice is always use fresh imagery. So he says, like preferring candles to electric light or handsome cabs to aeroplanes. And you might think, you know, he does that really well. It's an articulate argument against his own case in the essay, and it's a clear counter argument because it's conveyed using those similes. But he does it because ultimately his biggest frustration is the poor quality of language, and he wants to show a model for how language can get clearer and better by using more concrete imagery, essentially, even if you're making an abstract argument. And this is the one thing you guys need to follow out of this, is that if you're making an abstract argument, if you're just talking about a concept like language, or the change of language over time, or anything, you've still got to have that concrete imagery. You've got to be able to evoke a picture in the reader's mind, or else it's going to be a flawed piece of writing. It's not going to be interesting, it's not going to hold the reader's attention, it's not going to be clear, and also it's not going to show for you what you need to worry about. It's not going to show what you need to learn out of this module, which is you can craft your writing tightly. Okay, so in No Man's Sky, meanwhile, I've got to get a scanner so I can find sodium. To repair my scanner, I need ferrite dust. Now, that shouldn't be a problem, because ferrite dust is around. While I'm mining. Now, it is clear that the decline of a language must ultimately have political and economic causes. It is not due simply to the bad influence of this or that individual writer, but an effect can become a cause, reinforcing the original cause, and producing the same effect in an intensified form, and so on indefinitely. A man may take to drink because he feels himself to be a failure, and then fail all the more completely because he drinks. You know, again, it's just an interesting image to use to convey... a unique image to convey an abstract point. You know, and it kind of presents this sort of catch-22 in your own writing, I suppose. You know, if you don't start on the right premise of creating a clear, concrete scenario for whatever it is you're writing, you know, it's going to snowball effect into a poor piece of writing, I suppose. I'm not sure that's what originally I was going to get to, but this iron harvesting is far more draining than I had first anticipated, because got to actually think. Oh, I repaired my scanner. There we go. Now, hopefully at some point I can use it, but I might just, for the meantime, hang out in the safety of this beautiful cave. Maybe get a bit more ferrite dust. Things like that. I could mine and talk. It is rather the same thing that is happening to the English language. It's getting worse and worse. You know, it's snowballing out of control, is his point. It becomes ugly and inaccurate because our thoughts are foolish, but the slovenliness of our language makes it easier for us to have foolish thoughts. The point is that the process is reversible. Modern English, especially written English, is full of bad habits, which spread by imitation, and which can be avoided if one is willing to take the necessary trouble. If one gets rid of these habits, one can think more clearly, and to think clearly is a necessary first step towards political regeneration. Political regeneration, I think if you want to take concepts from this and write about the concepts, rather than just treat it as a style guide, as in I'm reflecting on this because it helped me make my writing clearer, all the politics aside, I think it's fine. If you do that, it's fine. If you want to ignore all the political stuff, it's fine. But if, rather than that, you want to talk about the concepts behind it and this idea of language as becoming a political tool, if you want to talk about language as muddying the political waters, then that's a really great quote. To think clearly is a necessary first step towards political regeneration. And this should be very, you know, this should be very important to you. Oh, there's my scanner. See, up there, somewhere, sodium-rich plant. That's what I need to survive the harsh atmosphere of whatever this planet is called. Planet is called, I haven't named it yet, I'm the first one ever. Currently, Pold B46. Rename it, let's call it Regeneros. Political regeneration in the, let's call it Orwellos. System. They're uploaded. Yes, for you guys in the era of Donald Trump and Gladys Berejiklian, or whatever she's called, however you pronounce her name, you should really worry about this, because language is getting pretty crap. You know, when you have political discourse expressed in 140 character tweets, and the tweets themselves are almost incomprehensible, such a short span of time, so much confusion, this suggests, like Orwell was in an era of fascists, we too, I wouldn't go that far, I don't think it's that bad yet, but we too are in a troubling time for troubling time for politics, and you should look towards regeneration, and it can happen. You know, we still learn from Orwell. He wrote his words a long time ago. We still learn from that, and you guys too can make a change in the world. You don't have to be the next George Orwell. You just need to take the good ideas from the past and make sure that you're dogged, I should say, on hassling the people who do not understand how important things like language are. Okay, I might make a dash for my ship that's broken down as crap, but I may make it. I just really need sodium, which comes in a yellow flower, kind of like the ones I was just destroying. The difficulty of this game was changed in one of the recent updates, which updated the graphics and did a lot of improvements, but it means your ship's a lot closer, whereas before you had to jog through this hostile atmosphere which constantly drains your shield with very little in the way of resources for 13 minutes just to get to your first ship. That was cool. I like that. And then if you died, your save's deleted. You gotta start again. Kind of like an old school roguelike. So that the fight against bad English is not frivolous, and it is not the exclusive concern of professional writers. And this, to me, this is justification for why we do a unit called the Craft of Writing. You know, it's not frivolous that we teach you to use clear metaphors, that we want you to craft your writing. Oh, look at these beautiful creatures. Oh, my visor's not installed. I can't scan and name them, but I can get in my ship for a little bit of safety and figure out what I need. It's not frivolous that I teach you this. How to write creatively, how to write economically, how to write beautifully, because you will be the politicians of the future, you know, and what you write on politics as a whole, as a New South Wales cohort, every advanced student, in fact now every Sanderdan advanced student does the craft of writing, and I'm pleased, and I think a point like that makes it clear to me why you're doing this, you know. It's not frivolous and not the exclusive concern of professional writers to make language as a whole more clear. I will come back to this presently, says Orwell, and I hope that by that time the meaning of what I have said here will have become clearer. Meanwhile, here are 5 specimens of the English language as it is now habitually written. I'm going to skip these. I'm not interested, to be perfectly honest. I don't care. There are a few examples of bad writing from various sources of Orwell's times. They relate to things you shouldn't need to care about. You know, they're written in such a way that he even himself says that they're not the worst of the worst. I think it's completely irrelevant to your study to worry about what's written in those 5 passages. So we're going to skip it ahead. But he gets to the point, each of these passages has faults of its own, but quite apart from unavoidable ugliness, 2 qualities that are common to all of them. The first is staleness of imagery, the other is lack of precision. Stale imagery, lack of precision. This is what you guys need to worry about. You know, imagery is vital. I don't care if you're writing an essay. In fact, I'll tell you what, I don't even care if you're writing your Henry IV essay. You've got to have some imagery in there. Unless you can have imagery of the stage, your own imagery, not Shakespeare's imagery. Unless you can have imagery of the stage, and what we're seeing as we appreciate this a little bit, unless you're clear in that imagery and you can evoke it concisely, you're not going to be a great writer. You're not going to get that A-range band in the fluency of your language. Sorry about that, I think my recording just died, so let's carry on with part 2, where I was in the middle of a sentence about how you've got to have fresh imagery no matter what you're writing. You know, in the craft of writing, this is especially important because, you know, this is the whole point of the unit. I can't have you guys writing, you know, these personal monologues and things like that that don't create concrete imagery. My pulse engine is damaged now. I have to find certain things to repair it. I can go into here to find out what. A hermetic seal and metal plating. I feel like the game's going to guide me somewhere where I can get this stuff a bit more easily. You used to have to just find it yourself and mine it out. So I'm just going to hop out and see what happens. It might send me somewhere. There's some little things around here. The writer either has a meaning and cannot express it, or he inadvertently says something else, or he is almost indifferent as to whether his words mean anything or not. This is a problem for you. You know, all of you guys, take this as a starting point for your writing. Do you actually mean something? Do you have something to communicate or not? Is there actually motivation behind what you're writing? It's especially... Ooh, that's a good find. I don't think you would usually find that. See, that Atlas pass, usually you don't find for a long time, and you can use it to open these things. Oh no, hang on. I didn't get it. Never mind. My mistake. It says it's required. I thought it said I found one. I think you've got to craft it. As I was saying, for you guys, unless you've got a purpose behind your writing in a unit like this, you know, you can say I'm writing discursive for the sake of discursive, but that's not really the point of the whole thing. You know, the point is that you have the luxury to choose to write about something you want to. That might be conveying your message through the drama of prose, fiction, or it might be through a kind of creative essay, like a piece of discursive writing. But because you have such flexibility, it gives you even less excuse for not having something the hell to say. So you've got to have something the hell to say. That's the point. The mixture of vagueness and sheer incompetence is the most marked thing of modern prose, and especially any kind of political writing. As soon as certain topics are raised, the concrete melts into the abstract, and no one seems to be able to think of turns of speech that are not hackneyed. Prose consists less and less of words chosen for the sake of their meaning, and more of the phrases tacked together like the sections of a prefabricated henhouse. You know, again, he does that, like sections of a prefabricated henhouse. What a friggin' weird simile. Why would he say that when he's talking about language? Doesn't have anything to do with hen. This is one of his weaker similes in the passage, but again, you can see him forcing himself. I'm not a huge fan of Orwell. I don't think he's a genius. I don't think he's subtle necessarily. I think that this is a frustrated essay which ultimately turned into 1984 with all of its prosaic themes of language as control of humanity. So because it's frustrating to read, I think we saw that in Orwell eventually going to write much more successfully in prose. That doesn't mean you can't learn anything from it, and it doesn't mean it's a good inclusion, because for a lot of reasons you can learn from it and you can reflect on it. This time, again, he forces himself to follow his own advice, make some imagery, make a simile. It helps his argument a little bit, but it makes the writing a little bit interesting as well. I've got someone joining my game, which is a problem, because if they hurt me, I feel like I can be killed, but I can change this so can damage players, friends only, and that means he can't hurt me. To Sylar Kane, if you can hear me, you probably can. I'm recording a podcast for my Year 12 class while I do this. Please don't kill me, otherwise it would be very embarrassing and they're going to give me shit all day long on Monday. If you can hear me, Sylar, I think you just noticed that. We're talking about politics in the English language, which I'm sure will educate you quite a bit. I've got to build some ferrite plates here. Sylar's over here. Looks like he's on the other planet, maybe. Let me go have a look.
Protection falling.
I'm not sure. I need my visor and I need metal plates, so let's focus on that. Yes. He goes on to talk about some of the specific problems. And the particular hackneyed turns of phrase he doesn't like. One of them's dying metaphors. You know, figures of speech that you hear a million times. You or I would just call them cliche. You know, are you writing in cliche or not? Is that a phrase that you've heard 1,001 times before? If it is, why are you using it? If it's not, you know, then great, you've done some fresh writing. Some of these things he reckons are just so well used that we're ignorant to them, and I think that's part of another flaw of his writing, is that he can't be super duper clear about what is a dying metaphor and what is one that's so dead we ignore it. You know, there's ambiguity there. So I would just take that whole thing as don't write cliches. You know, the cat's out of the bag now is not something you should write in your essays. You know, maybe dialogue for a character to characterize that person who's someone who's not especially creative in their language. And also orally, we're not refined. When we speak, we're not that refined. I repeat myself a lot. That's good for dialogue. Use cliches a bit. That's good for dialogue, because it's true. You know, when we are orally speaking, we are not crafting our words. When we are sitting down at a computer or on a page to write, we are meant to be crafting our words. There's no excuse for us not to go back and look at the sentence level and make sure the right words are used for the right purpose. Whereas oral is spontaneous and we're excused for that kind of stuff. Operators or verbal false limbs. This is kind of just an economy of language thing. These save the trouble, he goes on, of picking out appropriate verbs and nouns.
Component repaired. Component repaired.
And at the same time pad each sentence with extra syllables which give it an appearance of symmetry. Characteristic phrases are render inoperative, militate against, prove unacceptable, make contact with, be subjected to, blah 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 blah. The keynote is the elimination of simple verbs. If you can use a simple verb in place of, you know, exhibit a tendency to, tend to, sure. Serve the purpose of, you know, does, essentially. Having the effect of, affects as. You know, in almost all the cases that is shown there, you can phrase that in a much simpler verb, a simple verb. You know, utilize is a bad one. For you guys in your essay writing, I think this has just finally given me the map for where to find my hermetic seal. Perhaps. In almost all cases, you can select a better verb, and unless you're looking at every verb, if verbs are the heart of sentences, right? Whatever you're writing, you know, if it's a written sentence, whatever context, the verb's at the heart. You cannot have a sentence without a verb, really. And if you're using the wrong verbs because you're unclear on what you have to say, or you're thinking about fancy vocabulary, impressive vocabulary, which, you know,
Technology recharge.
does not actually fill the core parts of the sentence, like the verb and the subject noun, and you're thinking more about your peripheral words. There's a lot of words in a sentence that aren't a verb and a subject noun. You know, if you are focusing on that other stuff, before you're focusing on verbs, it is a problem. Alright, I might actually pause it here. I think my second videos might be approaching 15 minutes and I don't want to end in the middle of a sentence again. I'll pick this up maybe later and we can continue talking after next we get to the passive voice. So we might talk about the passive voice. I'm not going to do anything. I'm just going to leave the game here. I think you need to hop out of your ship to save the game. Restore point save. Next time I'll pick it off straight here in this beautiful planet. Looks like it's got rings. We're going to try and get the ship fixed and jet off to the stars. That friend of ours left pretty quickly. I think the intellectual capacity of the No Man's Sky session was a little bit higher than he expected on Saturday morning. So hopefully this has worked. If not, I've just wasted my voice, and I'll see you guys soon. Talk next time.